What's going on, y'all? I'm KMBest, and these are my favorite decks to win with in Marvel Snap. First up is the only stats deck with Wave. Now, what Wave is going to do is enable you to win these Kitty Pryde mirrors. Now, there are a lot of different builds with this core, so I want to go over what is and is not required. To my mind, I think Iron Lad probably is required. Jeff is a little bit more replaceable. The top end can be either just Doctor Doom or you run Leader in there. You can get the deck a little bit smaller if you cut the Polaris and Miles and you end up running, Mr. Fantastic and Leader. Kind of a different focus, more high rolls on the Iron Lad, more lockdowns off of the Wave. But generally speaking, all the decks in this sort of genre will be about 1 to 3 cards different from this. The major flex spots, Sunspot can be Nebula or Iceman or any of those things. But mostly what you're going to be wanting to look at is that this is the sort of default mid-range deck. You see Wave coming into the list in replacement for the Black Bolt Stature game plan. That's because the Kitty Pryde decks now out point slam you to such a degree that you end up having to rely on Wave to beat them. And now, the good news is you're really good at winning those games when you get the Wave off. The bad news is if you don't draw the Wave, they are going to output more points than you, and so you're going to be doing a lot of you see a Kitty Pryde, you snap because you have Wave, and they kind of know that that's also a thing. So if they're able to point slam on turn 5 to get through the Wave, we go like Hitmonkey, Kitty, Mysterio, then play like a 10 power Kitty the next turn, you can still lose those games. It's definitely real. And so I've seen people with Sunspot in the Kitty Pryde deck to actually like try to counter the Wave just a little bit. I think that's pretty cute. Definitely something to keep in mind when you're playing this deck, because you are very reliant on the Wave, and your Wave turns are not very good. You don't have a ton of good cards to pair with the Wave. Your best one is going to be like a Miles Morales, but do keep that in mind because you are going to try to play Miles plus Wave after having played Polaris the previous turn or moved to Jeff. And to that end, I think even a Nightcrawler might be a good inclusion here because you are so weak on your Wave turn that upping the reliability of Miles is a good thing to do. Next up is the basic Kitty Pryde bounce deck. There are a bunch of variations on this, but I have found that just the classic is the best version for me, or at least that changing this deck up doesn't really do a lot to move the needle for me. So obviously we have our Kitty Pryde game plan. This deck is a pure point slam deck. All you want to do is keep bouncing that Kitty Pryde, keep growing that Angela, keep growing that Collector, keep growing that Bishop. On the final turn of the game, you play Mysterio, you play Hitmonkey, you play Kitty Pryde, you play a million cards. Hitmonkey is enormous, Kitty Pryde is enormous, and you get to know where your power needs to be invested. So it's fundamentally a very powerful thing to be doing. Lots of big numbers in this list. Very pronounced weaknesses to Wave and Killmonger if your opponent is able to throw priority better than you, but overall, one of the defining lists in this metagame. Kitty Pryde herself is perhaps the most important card when it comes to evaluating your opening hands. Your hands with Kitty Pryde are so much better than your hands without Kitty Pryde that I honestly do wonder if snapping on Kitty Pryde is a viable strategy. The issue, of course, is that opens you up to extremely big blowouts when your opponents have cards like Wave. So you do have to be a little more cautious. But you should keep in mind that if you know your opponent is not playing Wave and you open on a Kitty, it is the best possible thing that you can do. Another underrated card in terms of evaluating your opening hands is Bast. Bast is probably the second best card to see in your opening hand behind Kitty Pryde. And especially if you already have Kitty Pryde, there are very few cards you want to see more than Bast alongside her. She is just amazing in here. I think probably a top 3 card in this list. I think Beast would be up there as well, but like just incredible. There are a lot of other cards that do replaceable things, like Angela, Bishop, and Collector are all sort of doing the same thing here. Nothing does what Bast does. By the same token, nothing really does what Beast does. Beast, of course, enabling you to play Kitty for free if you pull that off. Next up, Patriot. This list is unreal. For some reason, I have gotten more negative comments about this list than basically any other list that I've played, and frankly, I don't get it. You beat everything that doesn't play Enchantress, you go so much taller than everything else, and one change that I have seen people make is the inclusion of Ultron and the dropping of Mystique. I think that is a very smart change to make, but I didn't want to recommend it in this video because I know that if I recommend that, there's going to be a bunch of people in the comments talking about, oh, KM, I played Iron Lad and it hit Ultron. That's terrible. It's like, look, you have to deal with it. You have to deal with it because this deck is really good at exploding onto the board way late. And if you end up in a situation where, you already played all your cards out, well, then good. You just don't play the Ultron. But Ultron helps you win those games that are otherwise losses when you stumble early, because there's very few early game cards that you can play. Iron Lad is, unfortunately, a pretty required card for this list. So if you don't have Iron Lad, feel free to just move on past it. Iron Lad is unreal, and the whole list is built around him. The Brood, the Patriot, the Iron Man, everything's a good hit, especially if you end up cutting Mystique for Ultron. Now, I did want to specifically talk on, what happens if you hit Ultron with your Iron Lad. Generally speaking, when you play your Iron Lad and Ultron is still in the deck, you are going to want to make sure that you play your Iron Lad a place where you can still buff things. So, for example, you play your Iron Lad, you make sure you put it in your Patriot lane if you've already played a Patriot. You just want to make sure that your Patriot lane doesn't get filled up so that you can still put an Onslaught there. Things like that. You can still buff the lanes when you play Ultron off of an Iron Lad, and that does make even your low roll a pretty powerful game plan. Obviously, it's still not perfect, but it's still a lot of points as long as you think critically about playing your Iron Lad with Ultron. Now that we've gone through all of that, all of the Ultron explanation, I can actually show you the list as I think it is currently optimal. Obviously, you're going to lose some games to Enchantress. You opt into that when you play this. If you are afraid to lose to Enchantress, don't play this deck. Similarly, if you are afraid to lose to Wave, don't play Kitty Pryde. If you are afraid to lose to stuff, you are going to have decks that can maybe keep you in more games, like the mid-range Wave lists, but I think there's just a ton of value in proactively asking the question, do you have this? Because if you don't, you are going to die. Another advantage of the Iron Lad list is that you get this sort of inbuilt Galactus counter, both in terms of having debris and in terms of, if they Galactus you, you can usually play if you guess where the Galactus is going or they Galactus with a wave, you have Iron Man Onslaught. So you can actually contest those Galactus lanes fairly well some of the time. And between that and debris, you tend to have a decent matchup into Galactus. This is the most speculative list on this entire tier list, but I will say I started playing this list because I saw it near the top end of the untap.gg stats, and it had Star-Lord in it, and I was like, oh, well, I need to finish my Star-Lord quest. And one of the things I noticed as I was playing it is it's really good. Star-Lord is the most questionable inclusion, but when you look through 2-drops, there isn't actually a lot that's better than a Star-Lord in terms of also having an effect that is good coming out of Iron Lad. Now, why I prefer this list over the Goblin Titania version, of first, those cards conflict heavily with Iron Lad. You can't play Iron Lad in a deck with those cards in it, and I think Iron Lad gives this deck a needed power boost in order to compete with the Titans of the meta. Getting some free wins into your list is just always an important thing to do. If you have to grind out every game, your deck is going to... It's going to be a tough experience if you aren't getting some free wins in there, and Iron Lad enables you to get those free wins in this kind of control shell. Spider-Man specifically is a card that I want to build every deck around at this point. He is unbelievable. I have played around with this shell in so many different forms. I've tried Zabu Darkhawk in here. I've tried a Guardians theme in here. I've tried a bunch of different stuff. And Spider-Man has consistently just been the best card in the deck. If you're looking for an alternate angle to attack this metagame from, Spider-Man is an incredible one. There are so many people playing Kitty Pryde. There are so many people playing, like, I'm going to play one card on turn 6 decks, that Spider-Man is unbelievably powerful right now. And I think that, generally speaking, an extremely underrated card in the current environment. Finally, we have Thanos Farewell, because in a few days, High Evolutionary is going to come out, and all I'm going to be doing is playing Thanos with High Evolutionary. It's going to be the last time I'm going to be playing this list for any extended period of time, because this is a great list. I believe it is 11 out of 12 cards from Lambie series, and Moyen swapped Arrow for Leader, which is a great swap. The addition of Leader enables these weird little game plans where you get to go like Leader into Odin off of a Time Stone. No one really plays around that right now. Leader in general is just an extremely powerful card, and that slot, that Leader slot, can kind of be whatever it is you want. If you want to play Arrow, if you want to play Shang-Chi, great options. One thing to really understand about this list, though, is you have to snap aggressively and retreat aggressively. If you snap aggressively on the hands that are good, Mind Stone, Lockjaw, you're going to be able to make up the cubes from your common retreats. You also cannot get stuck in, I snapped, so I have to stay. You can't think like that. If you think you're unfavored, don't worry about the fact that you snapped. Leave. You need to leave your ego at the door when you play Thanos. That is the only way to succeed with this list. If you do things like on stream, staying for content, staying just to see what'll happen. Oh, well, I don't really know if I win, but I think I do. Don't play this deck. But if you want to master one of the most complex and rewarding lists in Marvel Snap, this is a fantastic list to choose. The one card I want to highlight from this list is Leech, who I found to be pretty severely lacking in a ladder context. He's not all that good against things that you don't already beat. So, for example, he would be good against Sarah, except you already beat Sarah with Wave, and he'd be good against Kitty, except Kitty keeps her power, and you already beat that deck with Wave and Killmonger. So he's there, I think, mostly as like a card that exists. There's not a lot of great fives, but if you wanted to make the deck a little bit more straightforward, a little bit more just play good cards out there, I have found that Leech would be the place that I would start modifying it with. I'm not saying he's a bad card. I understand why he's in all these lists, but he is probably about as bad in the context of this meta and what you already beat and your matchup profiles as he ever has been. He's pretty okay into the Iron Patriot matchup, turning off like an Onslaught. That's pretty cool, but like sometimes they're just gonna have more points than you anyway, and if they already have a Patriot on the board, well then that thing's getting buffed. It's not exactly at his best. So I think if you wanted to modify this list around, you could try the Leech. Obviously, if you love the Leech, you can keep him in there 100%. So this has been my favorite decks to rank up with in Marvel Snap for this week. Thank you so much for watching. I am KMBest. Leave a comment below if you want me to see your opinion, because I am brain dead and I read every single YouTube comment. So I will read your opinion regardless. I will probably leave a heart on it unless I get really mad. And, you know, subscribe. Do the things that make my brain chemicals go burr. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.